forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Dace.
And greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger 10. I am Steve Dace. He is my never partner, always co-host, Aaron McIntyre, representing his beloved Kansas City Chiefs here on what's become a perennial tradition, the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Really not that nervous about this weekend at all. I mean, if there's a team, I win it either way. The Chiefs made it back to the Super Bowl. If there's a team that I'd like to lose to, if they do indeed lose, it'd probably be the Eagles for a variety of reasons we don't have time to get into right now. But yes, thank you for noticing again the Chiefs apparel. I'm kind of running thin at this point. I've been wearing Chiefs stuff every day for almost the last 2 weeks now. So looking forward to it, though.
Would one of those reasons be a potential futures ticket on the Eagles winning the Super Bowl?
See, I love it when you do this. I love it when you do this. Trying to claim victory, which is, the most dude code thing ever, even when you don't have your favorite team in these matchups.
Yes.
So
There's always a way to win.
Living vicariously through other teams, although I think the Lions have a pretty decent shot, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up your keister here. They have a pretty decent shot next year.
We'll see. They're on the right track. But no, this was one of the smarter bets I made in my preseason futures bets was the Eagles to win the Super Bowl. Already cashed on the Eagles winning the NFC. So I've got a ticket on the Chiefs too. It's just not nearly as lucrative as the one on the Eagles.
Why is that?
Because the Chiefs were expected to be here and the Eagles were not. Yes. I mean, I still got, a good plus 500 on the Chiefs in the preseason.
Yeah, you can.
That's still pretty good odds, 5-1.
Yeah, you can still get. I don't know what the maybe plus 3-1 were maybe the worst odds, and I think maybe that was the Bills. I can't quite remember, but yeah, you can still get pretty good numbers in the offseason.
And if you know how to budget your money properly, you can spray the board enough so if you manage your bankroll that one of 7 or 8 teams wins this thing, you still come out with a nice profit margin, which is what I did. It's just my profit margin will look a lot more profitable if Philadelphia wins on Sunday than the Chiefs. But
and there's tips and tricks we bring out every year for the NCAA tournament, isn't there as well? Kind of along those lines. So
And
look forward to that in the next few weeks.
Yep,
probably.
that's coming up in the next few weeks. Where we are, 4 or 5 weeks until Selection Sunday, if you can believe that already. Yeah. Not much basketball this week, though. We're, in fact, going to take our first look at the 2023 college football season because now that the transfer portal window has closed for new players, at least until after spring ball, now that we have not 1 but 2 signing days where the ink has dried, and we've also learned who is and isn't returning from the NFL draft, we have our first real look at the rosters for this coming football season. In the last few years here on the channel, I have unveiled what I call my team total talent ratings. These are not a power rating. These are not a power rating. These are not a power rating. Did I mention they're not a power rating?
Are these a power rating?
They're not. No. However, what will the first 9 comments to this video be?
Steve, I lost my futures bet based off of these team total talent ratings.
Yeah, they're not a power rating. They are an essential component in how I make my power ratings, though. What I essentially do is take my team total talent ratings, I combine them with Bill Connolly's returning production ratings, and that's how I come up with my preseason power ratings. What I think Bill Connolly at ESPN does a great job of is measuring who's returning, who's significantly returning for every college football team. And I think that's vitally important. But you're also dealing with a sport, Aaron, that is transient in nature. Surprise players, guys that didn't play at all the year before, suddenly become huge prospects, right? I mean, just look at my own favorite team. J.J. McCarthy wasn't even the starting quarterback at the start of the year. Donovan Edwards wasn't the starting tailback at the start of the year. Colston Loveland wasn't the starting tight end at the start of the year. Those were Michigan's 3 best offensive players in the final 3 weeks of the season. Right? Okay. So how do we measure that? How do we measure the potential of what a team could be beyond what we already know. That's what I wanted to do, is come up with my team total talent ratings. Here's how it works. It's a very complicated process, okay? I take the recruiting ratings of the last 4 recruiting classes. So for this year, that's 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. And if you were a 3-star, according to the 24/7 composite of all the other recruiting services, I gave you 3 points. If you were a 4-star, I gave you 4. If you were a 5-star, I gave you 5. If you are a 5th-year or COVID senior player that factors prominently into the lineup, then you got a minimum of 3, sometimes 4. Rarely does a 5th or 6th-year guy get 5 because most of those guys go off to the pros, right? Okay. And then if you outplayed your recruiting rating, like a lot of guys do that at your school, Iowa, right? All kinds of guys every year outplay their recruiting ratings. I bump them up a recruiting star during the course of their careers. They progress to compensate for that. That's all that I do. And then I add up those point totals to give me an idea of whose roster is kind of stabilized, whose roster maybe is in a position that it might have the potential to cycle up, maybe the potential to cycle down, etc. before I unveil. And if you were watching yesterday here on the channel on Michigan Podcast, I showed you what the top 20 overall rosters were nationally. We're going to go through what my numbers are showing for roster talent just in the Big Ten. A reminder, it's not a power rating, okay? It's a potential rating. Your thoughts on how we do this and have been doing this since 2017, and just what you've seen, Aaron, for how accurate or inaccurate they can be.
It's exactly what a power rating would say. No, I think it's an original idea because, as we'll see as we go through these, and by the way, I want to go top or bottom to top when we talk about these. As we see these, this is how you start to kind of gauge. I want to take a hard look at that team's win total when they come out. I want to take a hard look at that team's win total. There are 2 teams that really stick out to me that I'm really interested to see what their win totals will be. They're at opposite, not opposite, but near the bottom and then near the top on both sides. So these kind of give you in mind, hey, if the win total is right here, I think they're actually going to be better than that. Or if it's right here, I don't see the roster having enough talent to even make it into that echelon. So that's kind of the main thing. This is to help you start to think, or at least in my case, to speak for myself, this kind of helps me start to think about where would I put teams, or where is the value in terms of preseason futures on each team.
And that's the number one tool I use it for. And if you have followed our preseason win total picks on our Patreon page at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast the last few years, congratulations. You've won almost 70%. I mean, our preseason win totals, futures bets, using this metric and then combining with what Connolly has really helped us to spot inefficiencies in the market. So that's what
and just
Aaron,
for a frame of reference as well. Standard juice breaking even is 53%. Right. So that's a 17%.
Right.
Something along those lines. So.
And so what Aaron just said, look at these numbers and say, that I wasn't expecting, because if you weren't expecting it, chances are neither does the market, because a lot of that is built on perception. Every now and then, Vegas will take a position on a team. Remember last year, we told you the one team that the most prominent sports book in America took a position on was Michigan State. Remember, we talked about this last preseason, Aaron, and they took a position on Michigan State as the win total under. And so they were way out of balance. They took every over bet on Michigan State win total they could. They didn't move the line. They weren't interested in balancing it out. They were confident that Sparty was going to finish under the win total, that they allowed lopsided action on that bet to occur. Did that sportsbook get proven correct?
Yes.
Yes, they did. But they aren't going to do that for all 130 some odd teams in Division I that they put out win totals for. Most of the time, in fact, for over 90% of these win totals, it is a position on what the perception of the market will be, and then trying to gauge the right number to get an equal amount of action on both sides. Only a handful of teams every year will they truly take a position on. It's mostly perception of the market. So when you see in these numbers, hey, I don't know that their roster is ready to have a win total of 10 or 11, or hey, the win total is only 3, but it looks like they got a lot of talent coming back. Yeah, a lot of it hasn't done much, but don't guys get better, right? These are the teams that you want to take positions on in terms of flagging them. And then, as Aaron said, you correlate that to what those actual win total numbers are when they come out later this spring. All right, you ready to go?
Let's go.
Let's go. Let's take a look at where we are with the Big Ten. Let's start at the bottom. So if there is a star after the team, it means they haven't released yet fifth-year or COVID year players that are returning. The roster hasn't been updated to indicate that. So that is not factored in to their roster score. And that's a big deal at a program like Northwestern, right, which has a lot of guys that redshirt. They are the most developmental of all the developmental programs in our league. So I could foresee Northwestern maybe moving, another 10 or 15 points when those get factored into the roster. Nevertheless, they seem pretty destined to have overall the least amount of depth on the roster in terms of playable talent of any team in the league. What has happened to the Fighting Pat Fitzgeralds?
Yeah, that's the one obviously at the bottom that sticks out the most. Basically, anybody who looks at this for the first time, I know you and Mark Rogers yesterday on Michigan Podcast talked about this in some detail. But I don't know what you do. And I'm just pulling up Northwestern's schedule here for 2023 because I have to think I cannot see them losing, two or three. I think they lost all three of their non-conference games, didn't they?
Lost to Duke at home. I remember that.
They lost to
then they lost to an
MAC
FCS team, I remember, right?
Yeah, that's the FCS team.
So their only win was Nebraska and Dublin. They never won on the.
I don't think so.
On this continent last year.
Here's UTEP, which is not a slouch. They're not, great. UTEP at home, at Duke, and Howard.
They've got it. That's an HBC. They have to win that, right?
Yeah. So if I were setting a line in Vegas, just looking at that schedule, and then on this talent rating or ranking, I would set like a 1.5 to 2 game over under.
What has happened? What's happened to my beloved Fitz? What's happened to my man crush? That thing has just face planted. Speaking of what's happened, Tom Allen was Big Ten Coach of the Year a few years ago.
Yep. So these first 3 teams, and I know there's only a little bit of difference between Purdue at 219 and Minnesota at 221. These bottom 3 teams are kind of, in my mind, in a tier by themselves. Indiana, as you mentioned, Tom Allen, the expectations or the dreams were sky high. Now you've got Michael Penix out at Washington. Have you seen what his Heisman? He's like in the top 5 or top 6 in terms of Heisman hopeful or odds, I should say. Now they're at 213. Also another team that I would put in like the 2.5 over under range. Purdue, also a team. They're rebuilding. They lost basically their entire offense, 2.5 range. Which brings us, that's in mind. Do you agree?
No, I completely agree. You had the coaching change there at Purdue. They lost a ton of guys to the transfer portal. I think their recruiting class this year is rated 60th. So, yeah.
I don't have Indiana's non-conference schedule up in front of me. I would have to change that based on that. But that brings me to number 11 with Minnesota, which is the first team. I told you there were 2 teams that I was really interested to see what the number would be on their over-under. In terms of wins for the season, Minnesota is the first team that sticks out to me because that roster, the potential doesn't look that great. But if you're high on PJ Fleck, which I know you are perennially, and you've got reason to be, if you're high on him, you think, well, you can surely maybe outperform that talent ranking. And so, in my mind, if they come out, so that's 221 is still in the 2, 3, maybe 3.5 win range, depending on what their non-conference schedule is. If you just asked an average college football fan perception of Minnesota for the last few years, how many games do you think they'll win next year? They'd probably say 6 or 7, right? On any given year.
Yeah.
6 or 7 games.
Their win total is usually around 7 or 8 in the Fleck era.
They'll win 6 to 8 games, something like that. 7 or 8 games. That's one of those things where it's like, if it's at 7.5 or 8, you might take the under. But if it's at something way down, like 3 wins, you might hedge or not hedge. You might take the over. So there's a high variance. I don't know if you agree with that. There's a high variance when it comes to Minnesota this upcoming season, because I'm guessing the number is probably going to be somewhere around 4.5 or 5.
Yep.
But I don't know. You might see books. Try to bait people.
Minnesota, remember, at this time last year, I said they had the most fifth and COVID senior points returning in the entire Big Ten. And so those guys are gone. And that is reflected now. This isn't a reload program. It's like, outside of Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, and USC will join those ranks when they get here next year. Those are the 4 reload programs in the league when they have competent coaching. Okay, that they have certain ceilings because of the way they recruit that they just can't slip behind. Everybody else is some form of developmental program, and Minnesota's in that group, and this is a cycle down year for them. And if you look at their schedule, I've got it right here, by the way. They are the Thursday game to kick off the Big Ten. They host Nebraska, Matt Rule's opener. Eastern Michigan is a good MAC program that just won a bowl game.
Yep.
At North Carolina, they're an underdog there. If they were 0-3, would that shock you?
No.
If they were 1-2, would that shock you?
Nope.
No. At Northwestern, I don't think that's an automatic. Okay. Louisiana is the other non-conference game. They're not as good as they were when Billy Napier was the coach, but that's been
Still
a decent
respectable.
group of 5 team. Then they have Michigan and a bye week at Iowa, Michigan State, Illinois, at Purdue, Ohio State, and then they close with Wisconsin at home. So would you guess they're favored in maybe 5 of those games? Maybe. They're favored. Can we sit here today and say they're favored at home against Illinois? I don't think we can say that.
No. So Purdue, Eastern Michigan, Louisiana for sure.
Nebraska, they're favored at home, I think.
Northwestern,
I think they're favored against Nebraska at home to start the year, but it's only like 3.
Yeah. So win total, where would you put that? 4?
My guess, that's where I would say that's looking like a team that is going to be fighting for bowl eligibility. But because of public perception, you might get like a 6.5 for a win
that's
total.
what I'm saying.
And that's where you would want to play the under based on these kinds of numbers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or on the other hand, if Vegas is way down, like at a 2 or 3 on Minnesota because of all of all
then
they've lost,
they've overreacted.
Then they've overreacted. So
Yeah.
okay, so that brings us to Rutgers and kind of a recurring theme. We'll talk about with Maryland. That's a kind of a number where you say they are building and / sustaining. We're not going to see. It's just such a tough situation. Obviously, we've talked about that ad nauseum, but there wasn't that long ago where Rutgers was perennially 13-14 in terms of roster talent in the Big Ten. So I'm not really sure what I'd set a win total number at yet for Rutgers. But if it's something disrespectful, like what we just said, you might play the over.
So here's their schedule.
Yep.
They could be 4-1. Northwestern at home, Temple at home, Virginia Tech at home, at Michigan, Wagner at home.
Yep.
They could win. They're not going to beat Michigan on the road, obviously, but they could win the other 4.
Yeah.
They could be 4-1. Then you start asking yourself, are there 2 other wins? Maryland at home, Indiana on the road, maybe Michigan State. I don't know if they can get to 6, but I don't think 4-1 or 3-2 is nuts. That's for sure.
Yeah. So set a win total at
say 5.
5. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's at 6, take the under. If it's at 4, maybe.
Yeah. If it's at 4.5,
If it's at 4,
you take the over.
Yeah. I was going to say if it's 4.5, I might not play that, just the hook. But 4, you get your money back if they just win those. If they go 4-1, you at least get your bet back. Michigan State. So I have a question about this. Michigan State. If you're a Michigan State, if you're a Sparty fan, are you pleased / kind of this is what we expected with a new coach in year 3 or 4? Or are you looking up, and I know it's only a difference of, 11 points. Are you still looking up how in the world is Iowa and Maryland recruiting better than we are? How do they have a more talented roster than we do? That's kind of my question. And I know they're not power rankings. I think you made that somewhat clear at the beginning of this. But if you're looking up at Iowa and Maryland, and even you can throw Wisconsin in there too, I don't know. There might be a little bit of discontent. This is one team I have no idea what to make of this year. Now, obviously, everybody underrated them 2 years ago. The position that the book you just talked about took on them this last season. Obviously, they were in a rebuild year. I have no idea what we're going to get out of Michigan State this year, so I don't really have much analysis other than that.
I kind of view. I think they're kind of in a no man's land right now as a program. They did not do it as well in the transfer portal as they did the last couple of years. 2 years ago, of course, that was an 11-win team that won a New Year's 6 bowl. Last year, they didn't even make a bowl. This year, they did put more of an emphasis on high school recruiting. and they got off to a great start. Then they suffered a bunch of decommitments, but they still ended up with a lot of the best guys in their class that they got commitments from. So they have some really good frontline guys they brought in, but the depth numbers, because of those decommitments, aren't there. On top of, the transfer portal class wasn't as prolific as the last 2 years also. So it seems to me as a staff, they're trying to figure out how do we know we can't rely. This past year showed you can't be a perennial program built on the transfer portal. At some point, you have to make the transition to you top off your class in the transfer portal, and high schools are still the bedrock of your program, right? So this seems like the year that happened, and they may suffer on the field for it, but they may benefit long term from kind of biting the bullet this year. So then you look at their schedule for this year, all right? Central Michigan at home, favored. Richmond at home, favored. Yeah. Washington at home, underdog. Maryland at home, probably an underdog, or a toss-up. And then at Iowa, underdog. At Rutgers, probably a slight favorite. Michigan, underdog. At Minnesota, toss-up. Nebraska, toss-up. At Ohio State, underdog. At Indiana, probably a slight favorite. Penn State, underdog. So we come up with 4 games there that we said they were definitive underdogs. Okay. So that's right in line with in the middle of the pack. And if they have a year where the ball bounces their way in those one possession games, they could go 8-4, 7-5. If they have a year where it doesn't, then they could conceivably have a worse record than they did last year when they went 5-7. I think that's possible too.
Yeah, I'd say if this is in the 4.5 range, I would take the over. If it's 5 or 6, I would just stay away. If it's 4.5
completely. Yeah.
or 6.5, I might play the over or under, respectively. So that's interesting analysis. Iowa, Maryland. So in the case of Iowa, this is just this is a case, just a unique case of can the offense be just normal?
And you can see Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa, Maryland are essentially the same roster.
Yeah, exactly.
So then it comes down to who gets the most competent quarterback play, who's got the more favorable schedule, because from a roster, really, I'd even throw Michigan State and Illinois in there. Those are pretty much all the same team.
Oh, one note on Illinois real quick as well. I would say this did not occur to me when the move happened. Everybody's talking about Wisconsin's offense changing. I think for the better, and it's not like their offense has been terrible. It's had some good years the last couple of years, notwithstanding. And I think that is the case. They've got Tanner Mordecai, Luke Fickell, in changing the way that offense looks. I think it could be very, very successful. I just think most people don't think about their defense changing, maybe for the worse. I just don't know what to expect out of them. Conversely, though, in terms of the other team, or maybe the primary team that you think of with the former Wisconsin identity, that could be Illinois now, taking up that mantle.
If I'm Illinois and Iowa, I love seeing Wisconsin make this switch.
Yep.
Because Michigan's kind of become Wisconsin with like a real quarterback, right? They have fully gone back to embracing, it's not a pro style offense, but a physical style, old school style of offense. But you're not recruiting against them annually, okay? If I'm Iowa or Illinois, having Wisconsin decide that they want to go more of a wide open offense, that gives me more of the corner of that market, so to speak.
You're playing into our strengths just a little bit. So, so that's a quick note there. So I don't really have much to say on Iowa. I would say on Maryland, just overall, the fact that they've been up here, I want to say, last 3 out of 4 years. They've been in the top half.
Yep.
That's, hats off to Loxley for sustaining.
We know he can recruit. That we know we can do.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a sign overall that he's sustaining something at Maryland. It's just, again, that division. So Maryland, let me pull up their schedule real quick, because this is another team that I'm kind of interested in. Though not as much necessarily as
Towson, Charlotte, and Virginia all at home. That's 3-0.
That's 3-0. Yep.
At Michigan State, I could see that being 4-0. Indiana at home, I could see that being 5-0. At Ohio State, Illinois at home, I could see 6-1. At Northwestern, I could see 7-1. Penn State, probably an L. At Nebraska, toss up. Michigan, probably an L. Rutgers, probably a W. I mean, I could see an 8 or 9 win season.
Yeah. And the perception still of Maryland, though, at least I think nationally, I don't think they get enough respect, maybe is the best word. If you see a 6.5 on Maryland, you got to think that's easy money. Or even a 7 on Maryland, you'd think I have a pretty good shot here. So that's another one of those. Moving up into the next tier, I know you need to get going here in about 15 minutes or so. So I'll keep my. I think with Nebraska and Wisconsin, these are stay away teams this year. You just don't know really how they're going to respond to the new coaching. It is ironic that you've got them at the exact same number. Penn State. I think Penn State this year they have a chance, and this is not. I'm not breaking news here, but I think if this is one of those seasons, I think they actually, if the ball, you said this phrase a little bit ago, ball bounces their way a couple of times, they could go undefeated. I don't think they really have that much of a chance against Michigan, but they definitely, it's not out of the question that they could. Home? Yeah, it's not out of the question that they could go undefeated this year because that's a roster, and that's even losing their starting quarterback as well. That's a roster that's got a lot of talent on it, as you can see. Not that far behind Ohio State. And guess what? Ohio State doesn't know necessarily who their starting quarterback is going to be, which brings me to Ohio State. That's the other team that I'm really interested in what their win total will be, because it seemed like for the longest time, 10, 11, 11.5 wins opening up in Vegas. Mm-hmm. I'm curious how they're going to handicap this team this year.
Could Vegas, remember, they got to play at Notre Dame, too.
Yep.
All right, so they have Michigan, Penn State, and at Notre Dame. Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State are all going to be preseason top 5 or 6 teams.
Mm-hmm.
And they're at Notre Dame. Could Vegas roll out with a 9.5 for Ohio State?
Yep. That's what I'm kind of getting at here.
Which is crazy that would be like their lowest season win total we could probably ever remember.
You can't give them
9.5.
But you can't give them an 11.
Right.
You cannot give them an 11.
Right.
Don't want to really, I think 10.5 might be where it ends up eventually maybe, but I would say if it's 10, I'm not sure you can lose. Does that make sense? Because I think they will end up at 10 wins. I don't know who those 2 losses will be. It might be Michigan, Penn State. It might be Notre Dame, Michigan. Might be Notre Dame, Penn State, something like that.
Yeah.
So I would say if it ends up at like a 10, you can play the under or the over. I don't think you can lose. And then
what
Michigan,
we're basically saying when you look at these tiers is that Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, because of the way they recruit, they essentially have an entire other recruiting class of talent to cull depth from compared to the rest of the league.
Yep.
And then Michigan's in a unique situation because of all these 5th and 6th year COVID guys and 5th year guys that agreed to come back and guys that didn't go pro. All right, Blake Corum, Zach Zinner, those are all guys you would have expected to go pro early. Those guys are all coming back. Michigan went out and got very aggressive in the transfer portal, thinking a lot of those guys were going to go pro. Then they all came back. Michigan has essentially 2 different offensive line combinations with 10 different guys that would each be probably top 3 or 4 offensive lines in the league. So it's very clear that Michigan is kind of the get to the national championship game or bust team in the Big Ten this year, basically.
Yep. And if I were setting the line, I would set it at 11 or maybe even 11.5. I know at least at DraftKings, that's my book. They were loath to do whole numbers last season. They really want that hook because they want the action either way, unless they were taking a position on a team. So I don't know. I would set it at 11 if I were making the lines, and if I had to add the hook, I would probably go up, actually. I'd go 11.5. You're basically saying Michigan has to win at Penn State or at home against Ohio State, which is still a rivalry, still difficult to do.
All right, we'll come back, play our weekly game of Would You Rather when we do. Here we go. Let's play some Would You Rather. Aaron, we begin with you. Would you rather focus your program on developing lower-rated recruits out of high school or improving players via the transfer portal who had already been physically developed from 1 to 3 years? Basically, the Michigan State conundrum we were just discussing.
See, at this point in time, just reading the tea leaves, it has to be the latter now. Tell me, and you can ask this both ways. If you're Alabama, what's the point of having a recruiting department? If you want to recruit guys out of high school, if you're in Alabama, if you're in Michigan, if you're in Ohio State, any blue blood, what's the point of having a recruiting department? Mm-hmm. Just look at what the best in terms of finding diamonds in the rough. Look at what those guys, what those programs or who those programs are going out of, then bag them with NIL money. what's the point of recruiting at all? And then for the teams who are good at finding the diamonds in the rough, what's the point of recruiting? You're just going to have them taken at the last minute as well. So
good point.
I think to me it's easy. It's the portal route. Would you rather bet any Rutgers, and you can throw Michigan State, this is basketball, Rutgers or Michigan State game to go over the total, or bet any Iowa game, or you could throw Purdue to go under the total?
I think I'd rather bet Michigan State or Rutgers to go over, simply because both those programs play a lot of close games. You get into free throw contest at the end. And I got to tell you, there is nothing worse, man, in sports betting than sitting in a game that you have like an under 132 and it was 62-60 with a minute to go. And you just know you're sweating it now because the free throws begin when the clock doesn't move. You know what I'm saying? That is the friggin' worst, is sweating that out. So I'd rather be sitting on an over 132 with the game 62-60 with a minute to go than the under 132, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
All right, Aaron, would you rather sign Brian Ferentz? Sorry, you knew we had to mix this in somehow.
Yeah.
Would you rather sign Brian Ferentz to that new ridiculous contract or ride the mass transit train alone in Chicago at night with a suitcase full of cash everyone knows you have?
Oh, God bless you, Steve. Putting me in a position where I have to say that I would rather sign Brian Ferentz to that contract and instead of getting shanked, basically.
Isn't the contract basically that he gets a bonus and to keep his job for doing what he's pretty much done every year so far?
Yep.
Okay. Hey. I mean, okay. So it wasn't just me.
It's good. It's good. You know, it's good work if you can find it.
It is good work if you can get it. Yeah.
So I'm going with signing Brian Ferentz to that new contract because I would rather that than die. So. But hats off to you, making me choose that option. That's you think you're joking? It's a legit question.
I was pondering it myself.
Would you rather eat bat feces or fall into a boiling pit of lava?
Was that your response to mine after you saw what I submitted?
Yeah.
I think I'd take the bat feces. Okay. As gross and disgusting as it is, I just get rabies as opposed to the molten lava would be incineration, right? Is that how this works?
Yep.
Touche. I deserve that. All right. We'll come back and wrap things up here in a moment. Twitter poll results for this week. We asked you, which Big Ten championship would you rather win? 87% said they would rather win the football championship. 13% said they'd rather win the men's basketball championship. Are you surprised it's that lopsided, Aaron?
No. And just kind of to take our viewers behind the curtain here. We get a lot of you still stick around throughout the entire year. I mean, thousands of you watch episodes from, January, February, all the way up into August when training camp starts and football season kind of gears up. But our numbers go way down in basketball season.
We're not alone. That happens everywhere.
Yeah, and it does happen. It does happen everywhere. So just based on that alone, not really that surprising. And it is more prestigious, I would say, to win in football. I mean, it's America's number one sport, college football, the most ubiquitous sport in America in terms of fans and traditions. So yeah, it doesn't really surprise me that much. Now, if you're asking me, would you rather win a national championship in college football
or the NCAA tournament?
I might take the NCAA tournament because I think there's far more variance possible there than I think in football.
That brings us to our feedback of the week, which takes us back to the topic we were just discussing. Joe Hugan says, it's much more difficult to win a football championship if you're outside the blue chips, and there's a lot more parity in basketball as of late. I'd settle for either one, but the passion certainly seems to run higher in football, which kind of goes to what you were talking about. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in right here. And we appreciate you and doing that, and would appreciate it even more if you would like, rate, subscribe, share, follow, 5-star review. Do that wherever you're watching, like here on YouTube, or tuning in and listening, like on iTunes and elsewhere, and help us to find more Big Ten fans just like you. No show next week, so we will see you again in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please feel free to follow us on Twitter @Bigger10. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next episode.